answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I made a Paris,
the Igros Moshe, Moshe Feinstein, changed his mind often.
okay.
Whenever he was asked any question at all, he always in his mind went back to basic first principles and worked out a solution, and he frequently came to a different conclusion.
Oh.
I was once at a wedding in New York where Rav Soloveitchik, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, was the Masada Kiddushin. He was in charge, and the chassan was a friend of mine. And the chassan was very careful to make sure he got a ketubah of the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, because that was the ketubah that Rav Soloveitchik formulated. That was the text that he gave the approval to. So my friend, who was a Talmud of Rav Soloveitchik, got Rav Soloveitchik's ketubah, and they were sitting at the chassan's table, and he presented it to the Rav to fill out and get signed. The Rav looked at the ketubah, took out his pen, and started making corrections. Cross this out, added this, cross something else out, added this. There are Rabbanim, maybe there are some Rabbanim who've gone through their whole lives and not changed their minds, but none that I know of. As far as I know, the changing minds is okay. Okay, so now the question. Okay, the question.
Now I'm going to be tricky. There are two questions, one which you won't like, and it may not be a halachic question, but I'll ask it, and then you can, what is it you always say, F7 delete or something like that. You can F7 me, but I wanted to ask about the connection that we have with evangelicals and the fact that we take money from them. Is that a halachic question?
Indeed, it is.
Okay, good.
And it's an important question. Let me divide the question into two categories. Category number one, if funds money going for the poor. Category number two, their money going to institutions, other things which are not for the poor, but for other Jewish purposes. As far as the poor are concerned, there is an isur, a prohibition in the first parak of Baba Basra. There's a prohibition to accept tzedakah for the poor from non-Jews. Why is it prohibited to accept tzedakah from non-Jews? Well, the idea is as follows. If they are rishaim, which unfortunately many of them are, if they are rishaim, then the question arises, according to the Gemara, the question arises, why do they exist if they are rishaim? The answer must be they have some zchut, they have some merit, or else they could not exist. And therefore, if we accept tzedakah from them, we are strengthening their zechut, we are strengthening their merits, and giving them life to pursue their evil, their wicked things. And therefore, we shouldn't enable them. We shouldn't help them to do any mitzvahs, because that's just going to propagate their rishus, their evilness. Assuming we're talking about a non-Jew who's evil, which is often the case. Now, as far as this is concerned, Rav Herzog was of the opinion that if the poor person does not receive the money directly from the non-Jew, if the non-Jew contributes the money to some gabbai, some organization, which in turn will distribute it to the Jewish poor, in this case, the Jewish poor person is not receiving the money directly from the non-Jew, and Rav Herzog held that is okay. Yesh alma lismoch. One can rely upon that. Now, as far as other organizations are concerned, not tzedakah, but other Jewish mitzvah organizations, I expose my feelings. here come my feelings. In my distant past, oh, I shouldn't say this. In someone's distant past, other religions were studied. And I remember how surprised I was in studying American religions. I was a student of Professor Alstrom, who was the Gadol Hador in American religions. And I remember he sent me on a research project for a seminar paper. He sent me on a research project to collect witchcraft books from witchcraft stores throughout New England, which I did. And I don't know why I was surprised, but I was so surprised in visiting these shops and collecting witchcraft books. I was so surprised to find Jewish books of Kabbalistic nature scattered among witchcraft books. That surprised me initially. This led me to some further research, and what I am bothered by is the following theology. Evangelical Christians divide into different categories. They're not all the same, but one of the common threads which unites evangelical Christians is they are looking forward to the rapture, what they call the rapture, the end of days. In the end of days, there's going to be a mighty war, and all the non-believers in their God, are going to die in the war at the end of days, and only the true believers will be swept up into the heavens. That's how they view the end of the days. But in order to propagate the war, which they want to get that war started so that the end of days will come, in order to precipitate the war at the end of days, it is theologically necessary to gather all the Jews into Eretz Yisrael. Only after all the Jews are ingathered into Eretz Yisrael can the final war begin, where all the non-believers will be killed, and only the true Christians will be swept up into the heavens. That they call it the rapture. Now, therefore, it's very important for evangelicals to support Jewish institutions in Eretz Yisrael so that all the Jews of the world will collect themselves there so that they can all be destroyed in the war in the end of days. Um, my personal feeling is I would rather not be part of this narrative. uh, I don't see myself as interested in supporting this narrative, and therefore I am reluctant to support them. Well, no one ever offered me any money, and I'm not expected anyone to offer me any money. But I would like to think that I would refuse to accept money which is offered by evangelical organizations for the purpose of gathering the Jews together in Eretz Israel so they can all be destroyed in the war in the end of days.
Well, because a lot of people are becoming less and less fussy about that, and they are accepting
Yeah,
rabbis and Havrei
yeah,
Knesset, and that's why
yeah,
I asked, because it's very
yeah.
worrying.
Yes, I'm
And
not happy about it, but on the other hand, I'm not in financial trouble. Baruch Hashem. I was able to make a salary working my whole life. I'm retired now. Baruch Hashem, I do not have financial problems. Many Jewish institutions do, and they're desperate for funds. I'm not in this. I'm not in a situation where I have this problem. I can be high and mighty. I can say, I don't want any part of it, but then I don't need it either. On the other hand, institutions which do need it, if it's for the poor, the money should not go directly into the hands of the poor from the non-Jews. If it's if it's for other Jewish organizations, there is room for leniency. Let me outline to you the tshuva of the Binyan Tzion, Rabbi Yaakov
Just 1 minute,
Ettlinger.
may I? There are some ladies that have just come in, so I'm going to turn around the screen so that they can see you. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. Put that up, please. Okay.
Ah, bonjour. Bonjour.
Ça va?
Bonjour, ça va bien, merci. Et vous?
Ça va bien?
Alors, the question, vous comprenez aussi l'anglais, oui?
Yeah.
Ouais, okay.
Yes.
Um,
See.
the
It's funny.
the question has to do with receiving charitable contributions from non-Jews. And I'm about to outline the opinion of the Binyan Tzion, Rav Yaakov Ettlinger. He was the great Ashkenaz rabbi in the 19th century. He was the Rebbe of Reb Shlomo Hirsch, among others. In any event, Ma'aseh Shahaya Kachaya. This is the background story to the tshuva. This is what happened. There was a natural disaster in Eastern Europe, in a little village, some shtetl, a Jewish shtetl in Eastern Europe. I don't know exactly the nature of the natural disaster, but the shtetl was largely ruined, and the Jews of Germany were raising money to rebuild the shtetl in Eastern Europe. The Jews in Germany put a few advertisements, a few advertisements in Jewish newspapers in Germany, saying this shtetl in Eastern Europe had such and such a disaster. I think it was an earthquake, probably. I don't know exactly. And they need money. Please send your checks to post office box such and such, and we will forward the money to the shtetl in Eastern Europe. Well, checks started to come in, and among the checks were checks which were clearly donated by non-Jews. And the organization, the rabbis who were collecting the money for the Jews in Eastern Europe, turned to Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, the author of the Binyan Tzion, to ask whether or not we can accept these checks, or should we return them? What should we do with them? After all, it would be an act of fraud to divert the money for other purposes. It was donated for rebuilding this shtetl, Jewish village in Eastern Europe. If you would divert the money for other purposes, that would be fraud. You surely can't do that. But maybe one should have to return the checks to them. After all, as I explained earlier this afternoon, one should not accept charitable funds from non-Jews. Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger responded as follows. As I mentioned earlier, if we're talking about Rishaim, non-Jews who are wicked, the reason we do not want to accept charitable contributions from them for any purpose is because if they are Rishaim, we would prefer that they don't exist. We would prefer that they do not pursue their evil deeds. And every time we enable them, every time we help them to do a little mitzvah, like tzedakah, we are giving them spiritual power, we are giving them merit, and we are just giving them more power to continue with their evil activities. In the words of the Gemara, if we would deprive them of the zchut, the merit of doing any mitzvahs, they would just dry up and blow away. Well, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger reasoned as follows. There's a big difference, he reasoned, between a Jew donating money for tzedakah and a non-Jew donating money for tzedakah. What's the big difference? According to Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, the non-Jew has a sense of Rahmanis, a sense of compassion, and it's the non-Jew's sense of compassion which motivates the non-Jew to donate the money for tzedakah. Jews, Baruch Hashem, are not motivated by Rahmanis. Jews, Baruch Hashem, are not motivated by compassion. What does this mean? It means that when the poor person knocks on the Jewish person's door begging for support, the Jew says to the poor person, "Oh, I'm so glad you knocked on my door. Here is a contribution. If you had not bothered yourself to come and knock on my door, I would have to go out looking for you to do the mitzvah of tzedakah. I am giving you the money because it's a mitzvah. That's why I'm doing it. And if you had not come to me, I would have to search you out in order to be able to do the mitzvah of tzedakah." The non-Jew, on the other hand, does not have this sense of mitzvah and therefore donates the money out of a sense of compassion. And when the non-Jew donates the money out of a sense of compassion, he or she is doing it in order to feel better. I feel bad for the poor people. I will give them some tzedakah, and now I feel better. They're doing it for themselves, unlike the Jew, who does it because it's a mitzvah, whether you like it or not. That's what you do. And therefore, the non-Jews who contributed checks for the reconstruction of the village in Eastern Europe, well, it's okay to accept their money and to send it on for reconstruction there, and that's what they did. Is this enough of an answer to the whole issue of accepting money from evangelicals?
It's much more than I had bargained for.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Toda rabba.
Okay. Before I begin, I want to talk about Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, which is coming up on Yom Kippur. But before I come to that, let me ask you if you have any questions of a halachic nature that you wish to pose at this time. Okay, we begin with Al Chet. Let me get the stuff on the screen. I hope you received copies of this by email. I hope they went out on time.
Yes.
Now, how do I do this? I click on share, and then I double click on the text, and voila, I have it on my screen. I hope you have it on yours. The idea is as follows. We'll begin with the Tosafot. Tosafot deals with a very unhappy situation. I hope we can deal with this unhappy. Not only the Tosafot, all the rabbis love to discuss bizarre cases. Not because anyone ever thinks these things are actually going to happen or ever did happen, but rather because the bizarre case enables us to penetrate to an understanding of a fundamental idea. And then once you've got the fundamental idea, then you can apply it in real cases which come up. Well, the case discussed by the Tosafos is Heicha Delo Ovid Maisa. Someone does absolutely nothing. Someone moves not a single muscle. Someone does nothing, moves not a single muscle. Kagon, for example, Mashlichin oto al tinok umitmaech. For example, the goyim pick up the Jewish person who does not move a muscle and throws the Jewish person down on a baby, smothering the baby. Now this is an act of murder. But the Jew did not do anything, did not move a muscle. It's the non-Jews who picked up the Jew and threw him or her down onto the baby, killing the baby. Mahadin, Mahalacha. Does this Jewish person have to do tshuva? Did the non-Jewish person do something wrong? Did tshuva? Does the Jewish person require kapara? Require atonement? Well, what's the halachic status of this unfortunate Jewish person who did nothing, and nonetheless the baby was murdered. Mistaber, it seems reasonable, the Tosafos says, she'ein chayav lemsor atzmo dematzi omer, the Jewish person did nothing wrong. The Jewish person could say, Adraba, my chazis tedama dechavarai sumak tvei. Who says my blood is redder than the baby's blood? Who says the baby's blood is redder than mine? I don't know that my life is worth more than the baby's life, or the baby's life is worth more than mine. I'm not doing anything. All of the action comes from the non-Jews. Dilma damadidei sumak lo avid maisa. According to the Tosafot that we've just looked at, someone who did nothing wrong, didn't move a muscle. The baby was murdered in the end, but the Jew did move a muscle, leading to the death of the baby. According to this, the Jewish person was onus. Let's get that typed correctly on chat. The Jewish person was forced against his or her will to kill the baby, but the Jewish person didn't actually do anything. Let me give you a few more examples of onus where you are forced, someone is forced against his or her will. Someone is forced to do a sin, and nonetheless, you're innocent. You're not guilty of anything. I'll give you a few more examples so you understand how it works. Um, uh, there are 18 gross anatomical lesions. There are 18 trachas in an animal. There are 18 internal diseases. There are 18 things that can go wrong with the internal health of an animal that will make it trafe. The most common problem is with the lungs. And therefore, the rabbis say, not the Torah, the rabbis say that after you slaughter an animal, you have to open up the thorax, you have to examine the lungs very carefully and make sure that the lungs are free of disease. Then you can eat the meat. Well, the meat has to be kosher, there's a whole process, then the meat becomes permissible. So what happens if they slaughter the animal correctly? Check the lungs, totally free of disease. The meat ends up in the butcher shop. It gets sold to the customers. This customer studying, and then while you're eating from the meat, it is discovered that there's another disease in another part of the animal which had not been noticed because no one said you had to go looking for it. And it was just noticed later. The animal's a treifa. Well, the people who ate the meat did nothing wrong because they had not been commanded to check 18 internal organs. They were only commanded to check the lungs, and that's d'Rabbanan, not even min Torah. And therefore, they did nothing wrong. Let me give you one more big example, and the big example I'm about to give will enable us to understand fundamental principles a little bit later on this afternoon. Here's a big case. Imagine that I have some electronic device. Don't care what it is. I have some electronic device. Shnei Edim, two competent engineers testify. Two engineers testified that the electronic device is takin, perfectly correct, perfectly functionable, nothing wrong with it, works fine. I switch it on. It bursts into flames. The flames burn down the whole forest. A vast forest gets burned down because I switched on this electrical apparatus. Two engineers just told me that it's fine, works well. They were wrong. Fire broke out and destroyed the whole forest. Baltashchis, destruction of God's earth in huge dimensions, but I did nothing wrong. I am guilty of nothing. I have no need to do tshuva. I was honest. I did nothing wrong. and therefore I need no kapara, I need no atonement for having done this. Let's firm up this idea a little bit stronger so we'll understand exactly the situations in which you are guilty and therefore have to do tshuva and you need kapara, and when you don't. Here's a text of the Rambam. Im shagag bekritot mitot betin. If you were shogeg, you unwittingly, by mistake, ate something wrong, violated Shabbos, stole something, but it was unwitting. You didn't realize what you're doing. Well, you have to bring a korban, and that will give you kapara, that will give you atonement. And that's exactly what it says in the Torah. If you bishogeg, accidentally violate a commandment, injure someone, hurt someone, bother someone, you still need tshuva. You still need vidui, a confession to God, and then you'll get kapara. That's if you're shogeg. Im hazed, if you're mazed, you wantonly injured someone, harmed someone, bothered someone, ate something prohibited, violated Shabbos, whatever the mazed was, well, all the more so do you need kapara. Kol ze'im ava b'ritzono. But whether you were shogeg or mazed, you wanted to do what you did. In one case, it was a mistake. In the other case, it was on purpose. But in both cases, there was ratzon. You wanted to do what you did. Aval ba'onis. But if you have no ratzon at all, like the poor guy who was thrown down on the baby and the baby was murdered, the Jew had zero ratzon, zero will to do that. If you're potter, exempt, didn't do anything wrong. When I burned down the forest by flipping on the electronic device, I had zero ratzon, no desire at all to burn down the forest. Onus, patur, totally exempt. No need for kapara, no need for tshuva. Similarly, if I did everything right, slaughtered the animal in the correct way, checked the lungs in the correct way, soaked and salted the meat. I did everything as I was commanded to do, and still it turned out to be treif. I did nothing wrong. I had no ratzon at all, no desire at all to eat prohibited meat. Bamed dvarim amurim bizman she'ein avodas Yom Kippurim. Aval im yesh, in the days when the Beis Hamikdash exists, the kapara has to wait until the Seir HaMishtaleach, until the Seir is sent out to the wilderness. That's if the Beis Hamikdash is standing. Nowadays, Yom Kippur will give the kapara by itself. So we have the idea that if against your will you are in a situation where you have no choice, but you violated something, that's called onus. You are patur, you are exempt, no need for tshuva, no need for kapara. This idea is embraced by many, many poskim. I quote now the Aruch HaShulchan, which happens to be one of my favorites. Just over 100 years ago, Eastern Europe, I'm really a big fan of the Aruch HaShulchan. Rav Yechiel Michael Epstein was his name. Vilna, Lithuania, just over 100 years ago. First, he quotes the Rambam we just looked at. After quoting the Rambam we just looked at, he says, Ein litmoa. It is not surprising. Al mashit tzarich ashogeg lasot tshuva. It's not surprising that if you are shogeg, you accidentally violate Shabbos, you accidentally injure someone. It's not surprising that you have to do tshuva. It's not surprising that you need kapara. Vaday kain is surely true. Hare b'vayikra b'korbanis, it says, in the Sefer Vayikra, when discussing all the korbanot, v'chiper alav hakohen b'chatato v'nislach lo. The verse is explicitly saying that bringing the korban is going to give you kapara for sins you did b'shogeg. So it's obvious, it's perfectly clear, not surprising that even b'shogeg, it's called a chet, it's called a sin, and you need kapara. And further, there's a verse, v'chiper hakohen al nefesh hashogeget b'cheta. Another verse also emphasizes that kapara is needed for shogeg. Then you get kapara v'nislach lo. Hatam degam shogeg. Why does shogeg need tshuva? Even though you were unwitting and mistakenly violated something, why does that require tshuva and kapara? There was a lack of care. There was some negligence. You should have been more careful. This is different from the case of the animal which turned out to be treif. There was no negligence there. There was no failure to be careful. I was careful exactly the way I'm commanded to be. I slaughtered the animal in the correct way. I examined the lungs as I'm commanded to do. I soaked in salt. I did everything that I'm supposed to do. There was no rashlanut, no negligence on my part. And where there's no negligence, no lack of care, then I did nothing wrong. This is different than onus. Onus, the cases where you are exempt and you're not guilty of anything, those are cases where you have no failure of guarding, you have no failure of being careful, you have no failure of negligence at all, like the case of the Tosafot. The Jew moves not a muscle. He did absolutely no wrong. He was in no sense negligent, and therefore onus and patur. Similarly, in the case of the electronic device, which burns down the entire forest, well, I was as careful as I could be reasonably expected to be. I hired two engineers who inspected the device and reported to me that it functions fine. I was not negligent. On the contrary, I was as careful as I can reasonably be expected to be. And nonetheless, the forest burned down. Nonetheless, God's creation was substantially ruined. Nonetheless, there's a violation of Bal Tashchis in large dimensions. Well, the Aruch HaShulchan explains to us why onus is exempt, why onus requires no tshuva, why onus requires no kapara, because there was no he'eder zihirut, there was no lack of, of taking care, there was no negligence, there was no failure to be careful. You did as much as you can reasonably be expected to do. Rambam further emphasizes this idea in Hilchos Tshuva. Everyone knows that it's relatively easy to pay attention and focus on what it says in the Sefer. Read the Sefer very carefully and focus, pay careful attention to what the author says, and you'll come to understand it. This is relatively easy compared with the task of paying attention and focusing on what the author does not say. That's a little bit difficult to focus and pay attention to what is not in the Sefer. I give you an example, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Rambam, in Hilchot Tshuva, all the rules and regulations of Tshuva, of repentance and kapara, says, Kol mitzvah shabbatorah, all the commandments of the Torah, bein aseh, bein lo taseh, positive commandments, negative commandments, all the commandments of the Torah. Im avar adam alachat, if you violated one of the commandments of the Torah, Bein b'mazed, bein b'shogeg, whether you were mazed, a wanton violator, or a shogeg, an accidental violator, doesn't matter. Kishayasa tshuva yashuv mecheto, when you do tshuva, then you have to confess, and then you'll have kapara, and God will forgive you. Now, you'll notice there's several things missing here. Although he emphasizes the importance of doing tshuva and getting kapara for shogeg and mazid, there's zero mention of onus. He doesn't mention onus at all. Now, I've given you on the screen only the opening paragraphs of Hilchot Tshuva in the Rambam, but I can assure you that if you continue reading through the whole of Hilchot Tshuva of the Rambam, you will find nowhere any mention of onus, of sins which occur in the absence of negligence, sins which occur in the absence of any failure to take care, to be careful. It follows, therefore, that the Rambam is in the mainstream of poskim who holds that onus requires no tshuva and there are other great svarim dealing with tshuva and kapara. The most famous, I suppose, is the Sha'arei Tshuva of Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah, it's a whole sefer about that fact, a whole sefer devoted to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of sins and how to do tshuva, how to repent in order to get kapara, in order to get atonement and forgiveness for the sins. In the whole book, in the whole sefer, from beginning to end, not a hint of onus. And therefore, Rabbeinu Yonah, and the examples could go on and on and on. We've seen already on the screen explicit statements that onus is exempt from any punishment, and therefore onus requires no tshuva, and therefore onus requires no kapara. The list can be made much longer by all of the svarim which don't mention onus in the midst of a discussion of what requires tshuva and what requires kapara. If in the midst of the discussion onus is missing, then these svarim also are in agreement that onus requires no tshuva. At this point, I'll make a footnote. The footnote I'm making now is something for you to think about, something for you to consider, something for you to meditate on. And if you have any ideas regarding the issue I'm about to raise, feel free to let me know, and I'll be happy to discuss the issue with you. There's something else missing in this text of the Rambam. You'll notice that the Rambam says, anyone who violates a commandment of the Torah, whether you're shogeg, whether you're amazed, it doesn't, whether it's a positive commandment, whether it's a negative commandment, doesn't matter what, you have to do tshuva and get kapara. Among the things missing from the Rambam's discussion, not only in this paragraph, which begins Hilchot Tshuva, but throughout the whole of Hilchot Tshuva, another issue which is not discussed is violation of a rabbinic commandment. Rambam says, anyone violates any of the commandments of the Torah, whether positive or negative, whether shogeg or mazid, doesn't matter what, lo chashuv ma, you have to do tshuva. No reference, no hint, no discussion whatsoever of violating a rabbinic commandment. According to Rambam, it seems that someone who has violated a rabbinic commandment requires no tshuva and no kapara. And indeed, in the text of Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, which we're going to get to in just a few minutes, a long, on Yom Kippur, a long list of sins that we ask for kapara, we ask for forgiveness for, Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, with a long list of sins. Every single one of them is a violation of a Torah commandment. There's not a single durabanan in the list of al chet shechatanu lefanecha. Sins of rabbinic status are missing, not only in the Rambam's Hilchot Tshuva, not only in the list of al chet shechatanu lefanecha on Yom Kippur, but rabbinic sins are also missing in Sefer Shari Tshuva, this other great sefer devoted to tshuva. So this is an observation for you to think about. Missing in the discussion of tshuva is tshuva for rabbinic sins, sins which are of a rabbinic status. This deserves some thought. I encourage you to think about it and feel free to share your thoughts with me. Let's now, that's the end of the footnote. Let's go a few steps further. The Lavush, Rav Mordechai Yaffa, the great disciple of the Ramah, the great disciple of Rav Moshe Isserles, who wrote the Ashkenaz notes on the Shulchan Aruch. The Lavush writes, Imhu ne'enas ba'ones gamur, someone who violates a commandment, someone who sins ba'ones, without any ratzon at all, without any desire, without any will at all, Eino nechshav lo avera. It's not a sin at all. Mishnah Brura, surely among the most influential of modern poskim, he quotes the Binyan Sion, the same rabbi we mentioned earlier in connection with tzedakah. B'mkom shema'achelin oto b'yom kippurim ein tzarech kapara. Someone who has to eat on Yom Kippur because has v'shalom, he or she is in a life-threatening situation, and therefore the halacha is you have to eat. If the halacha is you have to eat, well, you didn't do anything wrong on Yom Kippur. That's onus. You had no desire whatsoever to violate Yom Kippur. The reason you are eating is because it's pikuach nefesh, sakanat nefashot. The reason you're eating is in order to save your life. Further, the Mishnah Brura says, Misha chil Shabbos mishum pikuach nefesh, someone who violates Shabbos in order to save a life didn't do anything wrong and therefore requires no kapara. Mashanahagu nashim matlikot ner b'shvil yoledet b'Shabbos litanot achakach hu halalos v'sichlos. Some women have the idea, it's just foolishness, but some women have the following foolish idea. They think that if in childbirth they had to violate Shabbos, they think they need kapara for that, and they light extra Shabbos candles from then on. It's just foolishness to think that you're lighting extra Shabbos candles from the birth on because you had to violate Shabbos because of the birth. This is just foolishness. Violating Shabbos for a woman in childbirth is itself a fulfillment of the commandment v'chai bahem, and therefore is absolutely nothing wrong with it and requires no tshuva. There are other reasons for increasing the number of candles with every birth, but not because you had to violate Shabbos. Okay, up till this point, everything is clear and straightforward. Up till this point, we have proof after proof, source after source. Up till this point, it's crystal clear that someone who is honest and therefore was forced to violate the commandment, injure someone, hurt someone, bother someone, burn down the forest, whatever the sin was, is totally innocent, and being totally innocent requires no tshuva, does not have to repent, and requires no kapara, requires no forgiveness from God. Now we're going to change direction 180 degrees and say exactly the opposite of everything we've said up till now. Here comes exactly the opposite. On Yom Kippur, we're going to say, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'onis. On Yom Kippur, part of the standard machzer, part of the standard list of Al chet shechatanu lefanecha is Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'onis we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for forgiveness. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for atonement for sins we did ba'onis, against our will, diametrically opposed, exactly the opposite of everything we've learned up till this point. Why, oh why, do we ask for kapara when no kapara is needed? Why, oh why, do we ask for forgiveness when no forgiveness is needed? Why, oh why, should we do tshuva when no tshuva is required? Nonetheless, that seems to be what it says in the machzor of Yom Kippur. What's the source of this idea? The source of Al Chetanu Lefanecha is in the Avudraham. Avudraham was one of the great Rishonim of Spain, and he is particularly important because his sefer, his name was Avudraham, so they call the sefer the Avudraham. His sefer deals with the halachot surrounding the siddur and surrounding the machzor and surrounding all of the yamim tovim. And it's quite an important source for contemporary halacha. These are his words. Yesh sidurim shekatuv behem al chet al seder alphabeta. In the machzor, we have this long sins of and it's all alphabetically arranged. We go into detail about all the sins we've done in alphabetical order. And all this is correct. V'chein kadvu Rav Amram v'Rambam Rabbeinu Yonah shetzarich lefaret et hachet. All the great poskim teach us that when asking God for forgiveness, when doing tshuva, you have to specify the chet. You have to specify the sin you did. And these are the words we use on Yom Kippur. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'onis. For example, what kind of sin might we do ba'onis and we require tshuva and kapara for? Ansu goyim la'avor al achat makol mitzvahs amuras b'Torah. If the non-Jews force you to violate one of the commandments of the Torah, like in the case of the Tosafot, up until now, we've learned that in all these cases, you're off the hook entirely. And now the Avudraham is telling us, even though you did nothing wrong, the murder took place. The baby was killed. You have to do tshuva. We need kapara. Even though you did nothing wrong, the forest burned down. Needs tshuva. Needs kapara. He's telling us the absolute opposite of everything we've learned up till now. After all, it says in the Torah, these are still the words of the Avudraham, Asher yaseh otam adam v'chai behem. In sakanat nefashot, in life-threatening situations, of course you have to violate the commandment to save a life, but you still need tshuva and you still need kapara. Just the opposite of everything we learned. Now, the Mishnah Berurah was among those who told us that no tshuva is required and no kapara is required. The Mishnah Berurah now says, Mi shalchulo shotziu bito mebeto lotziu meklal Shabbos. Someone whose daughter was kidnapped by the non-Jews and is going to be raised in a convent and forced to become a non-Jew, forced to follow the non-Jewish religion. Mitzvah lasum derech pa'amav lishtal b'hatzalah. Of course, it's correct to go out and save that girl who was kidnapped, even if it means violating Shabbos. Of course, you violate Shabbos not only for the physical threat to life, if someone's physical life is endangered, it's correct to violate Shabbos to save someone's spiritual life, so they will not be kidnapped and put into a convent. Orchat milsenokot. This is the way it works. Hu hadin achar rashai lachal kedei lahatzil miyisogot. This is the halacha. It's permissible. It's correct. Not only permissible, you should violate Shabbos to save the girl from spiritual annihilation. Calls them Aisha Tzuyanu Yehudim Besabonis. And we're talking here about a case where it was through no fault of your own. There was no negligence here, no failure to guard, even though you did everything correctly. Still, they kidnapped your daughter. Im eno poshea chayv lasot isura zuta shelo yaser v'gedolah. Nonetheless, tshuva and kapara are required. The Mishnah Berurah contradicted himself. Earlier, he taught us onus, you're totally off the hook. Now he tells us, like in Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, you need tshuva and kapara, repentance and forgiveness. Well, we have this a big problem here. Big problem. Sources teach us two contradictory things which cannot stand together. On the one hand, we have learned that if Has v'shalom, you violate something ba'onis, you're totally off the hook. On the other hand, on Yom Kippur, we're going to make a big deal about how you need to repent and you need kapara, you need God's forgiveness, even though you did the sin ba'onis through no volition, no will, no desire of your own. Now I want to try to resolve this whole problem, to have a single understanding which will explain everything. Here comes a single understanding which will explain everything. The Sefer Perpetuates, 19th century. I say Eastern Europe. It is from Bulgaria. It's true it's Eastern Europe, but that gives the wrong impression. When I say 19th century Eastern Europe, most people are thinking of Ashkenazim. This is 19th century Eastern Europe in Bulgaria, which until quite recently was part of the Turkish, the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire, and they were Muslims. The Goyim were Muslims, and the Jews there were Sfaradim. So the Perpetuates is Eastern Europe Sfaradi, 19th century, and it's a very, very influential book, very, very well respected. Here's the mashal. Here's the example he gives. Hashofech kiton shel shemen al begadav hachamudot. You have a king and you have a servant. The servant spills a bottle of oil on the king's clothing. I don't know whether the king is wearing the clothing at the moment. It really doesn't matter. Either the king is wearing the clothing or he's not wearing the clothing. The servant spills the oil on the king's beautiful clothing. Well, I feel b'shogeg. Even if it happened by accident, the king's garments are now dirty. The king's garments are now full of oil, even if it was an accident. And the king will punish the servant because the servant was not careful. The servant should have been more careful. If the servant had been more careful, he wouldn't have spilled the oil on the king's clothing. So he's going to get a little punishment, lo nizhar b'zirut meruba, because he wasn't as careful as he should have been. That's if the servant was negligent and should have been careful and wasn't. But if the spilling of the oil occurred through no fault of the servant, no fault whatsoever, the servant was exquisitely careful, and still an accident can happen, even though the servant was exquisitely careful, still the king's garments got ruined. It's true that the servant deserves no punishment. The servant was as careful could be. There was no negligence, and therefore the servant deserves no punishment whatsoever. Onus is totally off the hook. requires no tshuva, requires no forgiveness, requires no kapara, requires no atonement. Aval, however, al kol panim, in any event, tzarich hu litaken et asher ivet, lechabes et begadav hetev, litaken lachziram lekavmotam. Nonetheless, the servant is going to have to wash the king's clothing. They're full of oil. The wrong has to be set right. There was no sin here. The servant is not guilty, but still the clothing has to be cleaned. Still, the laundry has to be done. The king cannot wear the clothing this way. Hachoteba onis, if there was no guilt, but still something bad happened. Of course, there's no sin and therefore nothing to punish. But tzarich litaken, nonetheless, you must repair what went wrong. Al kain anu omrim Yom Kippurim, and therefore on Yom Kippur we say, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha ba'ones. Therefore, we ask for forgiveness and atonement for sins we did ba'ones. Shagam ones tzarich tikun, because ones also requires a tikkun, a repair of what went wrong. If I switch on the electronic device, which my team of engineers certified as being perfectly safe and perfectly correct, and I switched it on and a fire jumped out, burst out and burned down the whole forest, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's forest was burnt to the ground. Something bad happened. I'm off the hook. I deserve no punishment at all. I was as careful can be, absolutely not negligent. I hired a team of engineers to make sure that the device was safe. They were wrong. Mistakes happen. I'm off the hook, guilty of nothing, require no tshuva, no repentance. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world was spoiled. Bal tashchis in great proportions, and therefore something has to be done to repair the burnt forest. You have to replant the trees. You have to figure out what to do to restore HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation to the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to be. It's true in the case of the baby that was murdered that we began with. It's true that the Jew did absolutely nothing wrong and therefore is guilty of nothing and requires no tshuva and no kapara, but the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been damaged. The world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has been injured, and we must do what we can to set that right. We can't bring the baby back to life, but at least we can do what we can to prevent these things from happening again in the future. It turns out, bottom line, there are two kinds of kapara. One kind of kapara is a cleansing of my own soul. When I did something wrong, I should have been careful, and I accidentally injured someone. I accidentally damaged something, or worse, I did it on purpose. That affects my neshama, my soul, and I need a tikkun. I need to repair myself. I have to do tshuva, and I need kapara, God's forgiveness for myself. There's another kind of kapara where I did nothing wrong. No one did anything wrong, but the damage resulted. The injury occurred. The baby was killed. The forest was burned down. God's universe was injured, was damaged, was harmed. Oh, well, it's the universe, it's the world which requires fixing. It's the world which requires kapara in these cases, and we have to do what we can to set the world right, even though no one was guilty of the sin. Those are two kinds of kapara, one personal, one having to do with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world, one fixing the self, one fixing the world, and both are important. We're going to pause with this and I'll ask you whether you have any questions at this point. We're all set.
We're all set. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to pause. I wish you a good weekend, a safe week, and eventually a good Shabbos, and look forward to seeing you again next week. Rosh Hashanah is going to be a 3-day event. There's 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and then Shabbos right after. Next week, I want to speak about showering on Rosh Hashanah this year, because it's a 3-day span. I don't know what the weather's going to be, but it might be very hot. We'll talk about showering on Rosh Hashanah next week, and then we'll continue after that. Until then, shalom, shalom.
Thank you so much.
Au revoir, au revoir. C'était mon plaisir.
Merci.
Il n'a pas de quoi.
Köszönöm, köszönöm.
Igen.
Szívesen máskor is.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
She's also.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now I want to turn it off.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm trying to figure that out also.
Thank you.
You're welcome.